Hi, I'm Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular update on issues and what's going on at the Policy Center and how we're getting ready for the upcoming legislative session. So here's our regular update. Here we go. First off, we are, of course, excited and disappointed by the outcome of the election. So there are exciting things happening at the national level. We think that is going to benefit us here in Washington State in terms of how the public debate is framed. And I'll get to that point in a minute. The second thing is, of course, we follow very closely the results of the state level elections with the legislature, Senate, House, and the governor's race. All of those were won by Democrats. So basically there's no change in the sense that we have continued one-party rule here in Washington State. But because of that, we feel that our work is more important than ever because there is no independent voice out there pushing back against the elites and the establishment on the crazy ideas that they come out of Olympia, except a bold, freestanding organization like ours. And that's what really energizes us. Also, we are intellectually excited because our facts and data and the boldness of how we present our views, we find has been very effective at framing the public debate and basically like pushing back on the radical left in the legislature because they find that when someone is courageous enough to stand up and make an argument against whatever loopy bill that they're pushing, very frequently that bill then dies in committee, even though the committee might have a majority of Democrats. It indicates that there's a certain number of centrist Democrats who are not enthusiastic about the direction of their own caucus and that they are looking for balance, common sense ideas, and positive reforms. And that's exactly what Washington Policy Center provides. So having said that, we also find another kind of marketing opportunity in the sense that Democrats have definitely dropped their representation of working families, small businesses, and local communities. And we are more than excited to provide that voice in Olympia. We are now speaking for everyday Washingtonians. We find that that resonates very strongly in the policy world. And again, this gets moderate, centrist Democrats and Republicans to join together to push back on the worst and most radical ideas. So we will be working all day and every day on these ideas as we get into the legislative session early next year. First up is committee organization days, which begin in mid-December. Then the legislature starts in the second week of January. The Democrats have elected new leadership in the Senate. Senator Jamie Pedersen, who's from Seattle, is their new leader. And they have the same leadership. Lori Jenkins is the speaker in the House. So we are on top of all those details. We, as always, are in conversation with members of the legislature of both sides. We have offered to be cooperative and in cooperation with the governor-elect's new team. As he comes in, he'll be picking a policy advisor, and we look forward to connecting with him. As an example of how we are a voice for common sense and change out there, earlier this week, or last week rather, I was contacted by the Seattle Times editorial board. They wanted to get together with me to have a discussion about this proposal on the state budget going forward. On November 8th, the director of the Office of Financial Management put out a memo to all state agencies claiming or asserting, reporting that the state faces a $10 to $12 billion budget deficit over the next 4-year outlook. So there are some technical things involved here, but what that did was basically say, hey, we face a big budget crisis in Olympia. The reason the Seattle Times wanted to talk to Washington Policy Center is they were skeptical about this claim and they wanted to hear what we had to say about it. So I met with the full editorial board. We had a very good 1-hour discussion. And the perspective that we brought was our experience in working in public budgets, pointing out that there really is no budget gap. State revenues are increasing all of the time. Governor Inslee has, over his 12-year tenure, has created 22 new taxes. The carbon energy tax, which was not repealed by voters, okay, that is bringing in enormous new revenue. We have a capital gains tax now, which again, the initiative to pass that, to repeal that didn't pass. So we're pointing out that people in the state work hard, they pay their taxes, and revenue to the state is going up. And then I provided a perspective that I think the media often doesn't hear, and that is the background as to why this message is being put out by Olympia and the Democrats. And that is to create a narrative. And the editorial writers really responded when I pointed out that we have seen this movie before. There is the same round of where leaders announce, oh my goodness, we have a budget gap. We need a tax increase. We have to we have a shortfall. And I went after each of those kind of bumper sticker phrases and pointed out that that is not the case. Only in the public sector would rising revenue or income or profits be considered a shortfall. I said in family budgets and business budgets in the private sector, anybody who has rising revenue knows that it's simply a matter of controlling their spending. They really were interested in me presenting that point of view. And then we've also pointed out practical ways in which the state can cut back on the $2 billion in additional spending that the governor signed into law just back in March. That's very recent. Or the secretly negotiated workers contract that Governor Inslee just in the last few weeks completed with powerful public sector unions. That proposed contract, although the details are secret, we have no idea how he came up with it, but we know that the overall bottom line is to add $1.3 billion to payroll costs for the state, salaries and benefits, going into the next budget cycle. And that's a proposal that isn't even in effect yet. So we are opening the door to saying, renegotiate that contract, look for savings. We have research and practical ways to do that. And then, of course, I pointed out that we have our policy guide for Washington State, as all of our supporters have seen it, which provides those practical solutions as well. So we'll continue to do that. Another example of how we're an independent voice in the media is I've also been invited to be on KUOW's public radio in the Seattle area, and more broadly King County, in the first week of January to talk about the upcoming session. We are always happy to reach out to liberal mainstream audiences through media and present our views there, and we're looking forward to doing that. The next item I'll move on to is some positive news we saw coming out of the election. And that has to do with a popular Proposition 33, a referendum a ballot measure rather in California that would have allowed local governments to impose rent control. Even in liberal California, that went down in flames by 62% of voters voted against it. The reason that's important here is because Democrats in our state often look to California as an example of what they want to do next. The fact that Californians rejected rent control is good news for our state. And the reason is there were two bills introduced in 2024 to impose rent control statewide in Washington. We argued hard against them. They were defeated, but we know that the sponsors of those bills are going to try to push those again. That proposal would limit rent increases in Washington state to 5% a year. The bills are called rent stabilization. That's a tip-off for analysts like us that when the sponsor is lying about what the bill would do, because it's not stabilization, it's rent control, it's a cap. We know that that's a weak proposal, and that gives us an opening to go after it. So that's one issue that we'll be arguing on. The next one is we're tracking what President Trump has announced regarding tariffs and trade policy. He has provided no specifics. He's put out numbers like imposing tariffs of 20% across the board, or even up to 60% on goods from China. We're simply going to wait to see what his trade representatives actually proposes. But we're framing that and tracking it because we consider that to be, first of all, a negotiating tactic on Trump's part. He did the same thing when he was negotiating trade agreements with Canada and Mexico. And secondly, we want to send a message to state policymakers to what we call tariff-proof our own products, particularly in agriculture. Asian markets are very important for Eastern Washington communities as an outlet for our very high quality agriculture products. We are urging Washington state policymakers to reduce the carbon tax and fuel costs on agricultural fuels, repeal ridiculous overtime limits on labor during harvest time, and even look at reducing property taxes on agricultural property, or a property tax cut across the board for everybody would be the best way to go. But the point of that is that as the trade debate goes on, and as Washington state is a very trade dependent state, we are providing ideas of where our leaders can position Washingtonians to succeed in whatever trade arrangements that President Trump decides to go forward with. So we'll be ready with that. And lastly, I'd like to announce more exciting news that we have new talent coming on board with Washington State. First of all is Vicky Murray, who's our new colleague who will be focused on education issues. She's working with Lee Finna to make that transition. Vicky has a wealth of experience in education policy at both the national and the state level. She's the author or co-author of 9 books. She's written over 80 policy studies on education issues. She's been published in USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Investors Business Daily. She's very experienced in dealing with media, making good arguments. But the most exciting thing I thought about in talking with Vicky and getting to know her is she is very plugged in on the school choice movement that's going on across the country. So she will bring that expertise to Washington. We are also working with our colleagues at the Discovery Institute here in Seattle, who are also promoting education freedom, education choice. So we are trying to bring a coalition of groups together that will leverage the exciting advances that are being made in other states. We anticipate that Texas will pass a universal school choice bill in the next several months, and then using that to show how we can improve education in our state. So that will go really well. The second talent that we're bringing on board is Jillian Olson, who is our new YP director. She will be based out of Spokane, working with Valerie, who is based in our Spokane office. And Jillian has 10 years of experience as an organizer. She's a networker. She's been a consultant. She really knows how to connect with people, and she loves doing events and drawing people together. She's hit the ground running by already organizing 2 Christmas events for our Young Professionals program. Those will be in mid-December, one in the Spokane area and one in the Seattle area. And with that, we are also looking forward regarding events is Stephen, our president, is working on lining up speakers for our Scottsdale event in the spring and our ever popular Palm Springs event, which usually sells out. That will also be in the March timeframe as we get into next year. When we have speakers lined up for that, we'll be making that announcement. And with that, I'd like to wish everyone listening on behalf of Washington Policy Center to have a great Thanksgiving and many blessings to you and your families. And I'll be back in the future with another update. Thanks.